What is up, EverQuest fans? Welcome back to Gobbler the Troll Shaman. And we are here in Freeport, level 45, and we're going to test out our Jaundiced Bone Bracer today. We just became able to use this at level 45. I mentioned in the last video that we'd do a little trial run here. And I'm going to do this kind of three different ways. I thought it would be cool to compare a few different styles of killing. There are JBB videos out there, but I don't know if there are any that kind of compare other options as well in sort of a controlled environment. So thought we'd take that approach here and stick around till the end because the results might shock you. I will go ahead and add kind of chapters here if you want to skip around. If you don't give a crap about the other methods and just want to see JBB, feel free to do that as well. But so a couple things here. So what I decided to do is essentially I'm looking at three different methods of killing. So the baseline is a root rot approach where I'm going to root the mobs and dot them and watch them die slowly. That's kind of what you might be doing if you were not twinked. If you did not have a JBB, that would be kind of a method you could take. And then the second method is going to be slow and melee, which is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to slow the mobs, and then I'm going to get in there and mix it up with them with melee and my pet, and see how that goes. And then finally, the third option is going to be that JBB, full-on rooting them, stepping back, and just casting JBB on them and taking them down that way. So a few things to understand here from a Freeport perspective. So I came here, there's a lot of guards here to kill. It's pretty level appropriate. There are two main zones that you would be killing in here, so West Freeport and East Freeport. You can kill in North Freeport. There are guards there too, obviously, but they are, I'm pretty sure, all paladins, if not like most of them are paladins. So they cast like root and can heal themselves, and it's just kind of a not necessarily something you want to get into unless you're a masochist or something like that. So the guards in West and East Freeport are all warriors, so much easier to just kind of root them and do your thing or whatever. So within those two zones too, there are what I'm going to refer to as strong guards and like wussy guards. There's really not that many of them, but in West Freeport, where we are right now, there's guard Kroon, who is a strong guard. Essentially, these guys are undercons. They con blue like all the other guards, but they hit way harder in like the hundreds, and they're just a lot more difficult to take down. So I'm going to refer to them kind of as I'm going through this process. So that's what I mean by strong guards. Oh yeah, there's one in East Freeport as well. His name is Guard Hirazen, I think. He's also an undercon. And then the wussy guards are exactly what they sound like. There is one here in West Freeport. I think it's Ledshen. He's like level 26, so he's kind of a pushover. And then the one in East Freeport, his name escapes me, but he's like level 16 or something. He has no business being a guard, in my opinion, but he's there, so we included him. I didn't track necessarily the cons for each of the guards. I figured that would kind of be just like too much to try and do while I'm killing them. So I just counted how many guards I killed, but I did kind of keep an eye on like how many of the strong guards versus how many of the weak guards, just to kind of help with the numbers after the fact. So wanted to get that in there, and we'll move on to our first method here, which is going to be our root rot method. So like I said, this is something you would probably do if you were not a twink. If you didn't have a bunch of items to help you out or a JBB, this really wasn't that bad in my opinion. It was certainly slower, but it felt like it went by fairly quickly. The time I was kind of kept busy, I guess, even though I'm sitting there medding sometimes, but between that and like cannibalizing, you stay busy essentially, but it is a little bit slower. So my baseline for this, I did not melee any of the mobs. I mean, maybe when they were like 2% if they're running away or something, I'm not going to cast another dot on them. But for the most part, I just rooted them and dotted them. I would send the pet in around 20% health-ish. The pet can't hang in there all fight. He'll get beat down too much. But when they're low health, he can help kind of kill them a little bit quicker. And then I did only use the fungi tunic. So I did not use the fungi staff. Obviously, with this method, you're going to be cannibalizing and meting a lot because you're using a lot of mana. So I wanted to kind of mimic as close to non-twink as I could. You know, you'd be able to chloroplast yourself. I could have done it that way, but I just chose to just leave the tunic on. So it's a little bit of twinkage, I guess you could call it that. So yeah, this was a good reminder of kind of like what normal leveling speed is like. I haven't really experienced that with this character that much. So, and again, like I say, it was slower, but it wasn't horrible. It didn't feel that bad, so that felt good at least. That it wasn't like too painful. But what we had here, so I started at 20% experience into level 45, and I ended it at 28% experience. And what I did for all of these methods is I spent exactly 1 hour. I had a timer from start to finish that I would kill mobs and basically track within that hour how much experience I got, how many mobs I killed, and how much cash I earned. So with the root rot method, I got 8% of level 45 in that hour. I killed 21 mobs, and I earned 180 platinum total. So I'll put the breakouts up here on the screen so you can kind of see what that translates to. But with this approach, I did kill one strong guard. I forget if it was Kroon or the other one. And 2 wussy guards. So kind of taking that into account with the numbers of mobs killed. I did kill one of the overcons, or excuse me, one of the undercons, and then a couple of the wuss guards. So yeah, this broke out to 8% of the level. I got 0.38% experience per kill, and about 8.5 plat per mob killed. So not terrible. At this rate, it would take me about 12 hours to go through all of level 45, which again is a hell level and the last one before you hit your 50s, so not the worst hell level. Obviously the ones in the 50s and the double hell levels are worse, but the worst in terms of old world content, you know, before the level cap gets raised. So 12 hours is a long time for a level, but not insurmountable. Moving on to the slow and melee method. So this performed pretty well. I was a little bit surprised. Well, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but it did pretty well. I started at 28% experience in the level. I ended at 42, so I got a total of 14% experience in that hour time frame. In this method, I killed 29 mobs. I earned 241 platinum total. That broke out to 0.48% experience per mob, and roughly the same amount of cash as the root rot method, 8.3 plat per kill, about 8.5 plat. I did notice a few things in this method. So this was not like 100% efficiency. I had a few like screw ups where I pulled multiple mobs at once, which wasn't great. I had to kind of root and then melee, and it was sort of a mess. And my pet died at one point, so I had to resummon him, which was a waste of mana. So yeah, it wasn't like the cleanest run, but I figured I would kind of leave it in there because that stuff happens when you're just killing, like stuff doesn't go your way 100% of the time. So I figured that was just kind of like the inefficiencies I experienced were part of the game, so I left it in there. I did have one instance too where I was killing Guard Kroon. He's the undercon in West Freeport, and I was killing him up kind of near the front gate. There's a building there, a red brick building, that he was down to like 15% health, and he got a complete heal from some mob inside that building, I'm assuming. So that sucked, because he took a long time to take down, and he hits really hard. So I had to pull him back to where he wasn't going to get healed. So stuff like that didn't go well, and just stuff to keep in mind if you're killing guards up in West Freeport by the front gate, you need to get them away from that red brick building. I don't know who's in there, probably some clerk or whatever, but yeah, he got a big heal there. And there's also some mobs that can do smaller heals as well, so just something to keep in mind. Don't kill by the red brick building if you can help it. This is where I kind of learned with both of the undercons, Kroon and Hirazan. They hit really hard. They are for sure undercons. I think they're like mid 40s in level, or maybe even just like 40. I don't know what it is, but they hit in the hundreds. Hirazan quadded me at one point. I swear to God, I don't even know they could do that at this level, but he frickin' quadded me. So they can be a little rough, especially if you do not have slow. If you're not a shaman, like, I would not even mess with those guys because they will F you up. So this method obviously was much more efficient than the root rot method. I got 14% experience versus root rot's 8%, so 6% better experience rate, almost, not almost double, but closer to double. On less kills too, because obviously I killed some of the harder mobs more often on the slow and melee, which granted they're undercons, but that also means they're going to get you more experience because they're higher level. So I didn't kill as many as the wussy mobs as I did on the root rot method. So ultimately I was pretty happy with kind of where this one led. 14% experience in an hour is not bad at all. So I was super excited then to move on to JBB and see what all the hype is about. So with our JBP, Jaundiced Bone Bracer approach, I started at 50% experience into level 45. I ended at 65%, so I netted 15% experience for the hour, which is kind of surprising to me if you consider the fact that the slow and melee approach got me 14%, so I got 1% better experience with JBB. Also in this approach, I killed 35 mobs, so I killed about 20% more mobs than I did with the slow and melee method. I earned 345 plat. It worked out to about 0.43% experience per mob, and almost 10 plat per mob. I think that was just kind of an anomaly. The other two were like 8.5. I probably just got more fine steel with this, so it was just a better run. So I don't think that's anything too crazy. You're probably averaging about 9 plat per mob with this, with killing in Freeport. During the JBP attempt, I killed Guard Hirazan and Guard Kroon twice, both. So I killed 4 of the strong mobs. I also had kind of a lot of inefficiencies with this method. I had a lot of multi-pulls again that I had to like root and sort of deal with. My pet died again at one point. The strong guards, Hirazan and Kroon, resist a lot and break root a lot, which is super frustrating. They can resist fully JBB clicks, and they can break root a lot more often, so it's kind of a pain in the ass to kill them. Definitely takes longer. Again, trade-off, you get more experience, but they are more of a hassle for sure. So anyways, going back to the experience discrepancy here, so 1% more with JBB kind of surprised me. Just all the hype around the Jaundiced Bone Bracer, I thought for sure this method was just gonna blow the slow and melee out of the water. But I do think there's a couple things to consider here. And it makes sense once I kind of break this down. So within my UI, I don't know where within the percent I'm kind of starting to XP. So if I started at 50% with JBB method, was I exactly 50% or was I like 50%, 50.9% into the level? Like the fractions there don't really come into play, so there could be a bit of a swing. If you consider with the slow and melee method, if I started at 28.9%, if I was like real close to ticking over and then ended at exactly 42%, that's actually much closer to a 13% gain rather than the 14% gain that I tracked. So it could be potentially 1% less depending on kind of where you start with that. Conversely, with the JBP approach, let's say I started at exactly 50% and ended at 65.9, which is like almost ticking over into that 66, but not quite. Then that becomes a 16% experience gain versus the 15 that I tracked. So if you kind of consider that it's almost a 3% swing, where potentially with the slow and melee maybe it was closer to 13%, and with JBB maybe it was closer to 16%. And we can't know that for sure, but there is something we can look at here to kind of determine if that was the case. And I think it was, because if you look at the XP per mob, with the slow and melee attempt it was 0.48, and with the JBB attempt it was 0.43. And I killed more of the strong guards during the JBB attempt than I did during the slow and melee attempt. So I was killing higher level guards, which would have netted me more experience. How did I get less per kill? So if you kind of average that out and consider that I, started on the low end of an experience point and ended on the high end, it actually does net out to about 0.45% across both if I kind of do that math. So that makes a lot more sense, considering I should have gotten more XP during the JBP attempt with the guards that I did kill. So I think that 3% difference is actually pretty legit. So I'm going to consider that being the case here, that for slow and melee, I actually got 13%, and for JBB, I actually got 16%. So that makes a lot more sense, and actually does give JBB a considerable edge there. The other thing to really consider here, and this is kind of bigger than even the last point that I described, is with the slow and melee attempt, we're talking about some items that come into play that really don't with the JBB attempt. So I have a fungi tunic, I have a fungi staff, I have a really good weapon, and I have a 34% haste belt. None of those items really matter with the JBB approach because you're just rooting and clicking your JBB. So when you break that down, fungi tunic, I'm not totally sure what the prices are on these things right now, but like probably 60k plat. Fungi staff is probably 14k. My weapon, you don't have to have an herbalist spade, but I paid 12k for that. And then my haste belt, that's probably 16,000 plat. So you're talking about 100k in items that you don't need for the JBB approach, that don't really change anything. So that really comes into play here too. I think if I didn't have all those items, I don't even know if the slow and melee process would be viable at that point, but certainly it would drop my XP rate a considerable amount. So when you consider 100k worth of items versus JBB, which is what, like 20k plat, it kind of becomes a little bit more of a no-brainer that JBB is definitely more efficient when we look at it that way. So there you have it. That's kind of the approach I'm going to use for this. With those revised numbers, the root rot method got me 8% experience, slow and melee got me 13, and then JBB got me 16. So comparing those to the baseline of root rot, the slow and melee approach is about 60% more efficient from the root rot method, which is pretty considerable. But JBB is almost 99%, so basically doubly as efficient as root rot. And like I say, you really have a much lower barrier to entry with JBB. You need to raise, about 20k in funds versus the 100k to get to the same point that I was with the slow and melee approach. So with that said, I think early results were kind of shocking. I was like, wow, JBB is not that great. But no, actually it is. It just so happens that I have a lot of other items that make meleeing still very viable for me at this level, but not everyone's going to have that. So yeah, I would say the JBB is an absolute worth it if you have the funds or if you're trying to save up for it. Essentially, it doubled my rate of experience, right? 8% with root rot versus 16% with JBB. So you're cutting, what did I say? It was like 12 hours for root rot to get through 45. It would be like 6 hours with the JBB. You're cutting that experience time in half, and obviously you can continue to use that for future levels. So yeah, it's a pretty powerful tool. I will say the JBB method was probably, if I'm being honest, the least fun. Just because you're really just clicking one item, and it's an 8-second cast, which is a long cast, but also like not long enough for you to like divert your attention and like do something else like you can when you're like sitting and medding when you're root rotting. You're gonna have like 4 or 5 minutes where you can sort of do something else. Not really when you're JBB. You're fully on it the whole time, but you're just sitting there and clicking a button every 8 seconds. Not to mention root breaks a lot more with JBB because you have all those direct damage effects, and it's just kind of like frustrating a little bit when you get like back-to-back-to-back root breaks. You have to keep rooting and then running away from the mob, and then I gotta pull the pet off, and it's, sometimes you can get through a kill with only 1 or 2 root breaks, but sometimes it's just more constant. So it's sort of a pain in the ass. Not the most fun method of leveling, but for the time that it saves, essentially doubling my leveling speed, I think it's definitely worth it. If you're kind of on the fence about the JBB, I would go for it. It's pretty impactful. And you can use that in group setting too. If you're in a group where you're not having to cast a ton or you have full mana, you can throw in some JBB damage, save your mana for heals or slows or whatever it is. It just makes you a more efficient player all around. But hopefully this kind of shows you that you also don't need it in any regard either. If it's your first toon, there's no way you have the funds for it. That's fine. Like, the route route approach is fine. It wasn't super boring. Like, it was kind of engaging. It's slower experience, but you know, it was good. But yeah, if you're thinking about getting JBB, it's probably worth saving up for. So yeah, to sum things up, you know, you're looking at probably about 300 plat an hour doing this camp with the JBB, which isn't the best money in the game, but for getting experience and getting cash at the same time, it's pretty decent. I might try out some other guard spots with JBB. I was kind of thinking about that. I'm not sure where I might do that. Ogok was a consideration. I didn't want to ruin that faction, but then I was also like, I don't think I've been to Ogok once on this character, so I'm like, whatever. So maybe we'll do that in a future video, but essentially the levels are starting to slow down quite a bit now as we're getting higher, so I want to kind of keep releasing content for you guys, but you know, you don't want to watch me sit here for the next 4 levels killing Freeport guards, so we'll have to figure out what we want to do there. I've also kind of been splitting time between here and Quorum. Project Quorum, if you guys aren't aware, is a new server that came out in October. It's progression server essentially, so it's going up 2 planes of power. They're going to spend 9 months in each expansion. The reason I've been doing that is my buddies who played EQ with me back in the day jumped on there, so I've just kind of been playing with them. When they fizzle out, if they fizzle out at some point, I will probably back on P99 exclusively, but yeah, so things are just going a little slower for me because I'm splitting time between the 2 games, so I don't know if I'll keep releasing a video every week like I have been on the cadence I've been on here, but I'm still at it. If you don't see me next week, just know that there's something in the works. And feel free to shout out some suggestions too. If there's stuff you guys want to see, you want me to test the JBB on something else, let me know. Yeah, but that's pretty much it, guys. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you like the approach of looking at a few different methods of killing. I was just really curious myself and thought you guys might be interested as well. So, headline, JBB is worth the money, but you can also do it without it. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop rambling, and that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in.